We'll start in about 30 seconds.
All right.
Okay, hello, welcome to Tarot for Weirdos, or Can I Ignore Death? We will explain that by the third session here. This is Class 1, the History, Layout, Numbers, and Symbols. About me, I'm Reverend Forrest Gummo. I'm a Doctor of Subgenius Archaeology. I have a Doctorate of Metaphysics from the ULC. I'm a builder of the Addendum. I'm initiated in the Golden Dawn. I flunked out of the Freemasons, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and the Arcane School. And I'm the first to admit that. I'm a cartoonist, a writer. I've worked in AI. I'm just kind of an all-purpose creative. I'm a big aficionado of the Mauve Zone, which is my own personal subgenius cult. And my email is going to be mv17zn17@gmail.com. If you want to reach out to me and get any questions, that's fine. I'm happy to help. I'm doing this for free because I'm only in it for the game. I'm not charging anybody for this. So that's all you need to know on that. Okay, so we're gonna today is gonna be kind of in two parts. We're gonna go over the history of tarot, and then we're gonna go into the basic systems that power the tarot, the numbers, the symbols, things like that are pretty much mandatory to know if you want to be a tarot reader. A lot of people will jump into tarot not knowing those things, and they'll just look at the pretty pictures on the cards. And you can do that. Nobody's going to stop you. I'm certainly not going to stop you either. But I think that there's a lot of depth to be gotten if you are knowledgeable on what all these images in there mean. Tarot is it's an interesting thing. It doesn't really have an origin. It just sort of appears out of the 15th century. There's all sorts of myths, all sorts of stories, complete fabrications around where it came from. For example, maybe these are actually the secret religious images of Atlantis, or they came from ancient Egypt, where they were giant stone tablets in a forgotten temple. Victorians held that they came from the Roma, called at the time the Gypsies, and later New Agers would associate the Ascended Masters with them. I think that's all bullshit. I'm not really gonna blow smoke up your ass about that kind of thing. There's also an interesting thing called the Bimbine Tablet, which was a large fabricated archaeological quote find in the ancient Roman era, found in somehow got to the ownership of a Cardinal Bimbo in the Middle Ages. That's where it got its name. It's been found to have been completely fabricated as well. It was ancient Romans making fake ancient Egyptian imagery, not knowing hieroglyphics, not really knowing how anything worked. So it's just a lot of pretty pictures, 22 in number, and people have kind of got, oh, well, there's, it must be related to the tarot. I don't really buy that. Famous occult historian Manly P. Hall believes that is the case. I disagree with him. Freemasonry, later there will be a lot of Freemasonry that comes into tarot, but I don't think it was there originally. The original Marseille, Visconti, Sola Busca decks have no evidence of Freemasonry in them, and why would they? Because Freemasonry is largely a British invention in the Middle Ages. But we're gonna the likely origins of the tarot come from the Visconti tarot, which was the earliest tarot that we have. It was basically heraldic images of the Visconti family of aristocrats in Florence, and they roughly match up to tarot, not always 100%. So it may be that a lot of the images were drawn from this source, and it was clearly a card game. However, what later became tarot was just an adaptation of those original cards. One of the likely pet beliefs that I have is it's kind of a merge. I believe that there are sort of flashcards for Spanish, Muslim, Jewish folks in Spain and northern Italy at the time, where it was, you know, a very cosmopolitan society. And I think a lot of Neoplatonic theology moved into it from there. And there's also what's called the Marseille Tarot, which is the first printed tarot. That is very similar to the Visconti. However, I personally have found the similarities between the Marseille Tarot and the Albrecht Dürer Book of Revelations is kind of shocking to me, and I don't think anybody has ever really brought that up. And I'm potentially going to write a book on that later on. So I'm not going to get into it, but that's my own pet theory. Is I think just some enterprising printer roundabout, you know, the Gutenberg Bible era was like, oh, what sells? Oh, I know, images from the Book of Revelations and playing cards. Let's put them on one big sheet and people can cut them out and that'll sell. That's what my own personal opinion is. We don't really know too much about what the tarot symbolizes until a French man named Court de Gebelin shows up, and he's a French encyclopedist, which was at the time their goal was to just notate all known knowledge of the universe. That was their goal. And they, you know, they did a lot of work, and it's, you know, we still have encyclopedias today. Arguably, Wikipedia is, you know, the best example of that kind of tradition. There's a minor detail called Cagliostro clandestine Freemasonry, and Cagliostro was a famous huckster, hoaxer, con man who basically created his own side degree of Freemasonry. And a lot of that particular vein of Freemasonry winds up in France and Italy, which does influence the tarot in a lot of ways. That tradition kind of moves northward through Germany and then into the Golden Dawn era of the Victorian English. So there's all sorts of different paths, rivers, roads that lead to ultimately what we got as tarot. Ultimately, it's universal imagery that is open to a wide degree of interpretation. It's been worked out over centuries. A lot of very smart people have involved just making these images work on a purely like functional, non-supernatural basis. I just think they're very smartly designed artwork that can be used but pretty much by anybody anywhere on the planet, as long as you can understand, you know, what a king is, what a woman is, what a priest is. I think you're going to be able to find some strength in the tarot just by doing that. But what we really want to go to is that the French were the first to really be into tarot. Like in Italy, it was just a game. It's not far from Japanese Hanafuda. If you were to play it, you're wanting to get various combinations of the trump cards to gather points, and then you turn those in at the end of the round. And after the French were enthused of it, they actually got bored of it and went back to normal playing cards for their divination. Whereas the British in the late Victorian era really pick it up. And we'll get into that history. But ultimately, we don't really know where tarot quotes started. It's not anything that we have history on. And you can extrapolate, come up with all sorts of theories. And a lot of people have their own, you know, sort of cosmology built into it. And it's very important to a lot of people to claim to know where the tarot comes from. I don't necessarily think that's important, but I do think it is interesting to note some of the key individuals. So we'll get to them. The first tarot historian we have is this Protestant minister named Antoine Court de Gebelin. He is an intellectual. He's very well respected. He was friends with Benjamin Franklin. He's just a very well-known Huguenot minister. I don't know how to pronounce it, Huguenot. He was a member of this encyclopedist movement. Their goal was basically, hey, find the information on something that you know a lot about. Let's put it in a book, print it, and sell it to the post-revolutionary or pre-revolutionary, in his case, a common man who are just now kind of learning how to read en masse. So this is very useful to them to have a book on the shelf that explains the world's history, and you could go down to a coffee house or a bar or something, pull one off the shelf, and you could look up what you wanted to know. So he really did a lot of interesting things with both mesmerism. He was really into animal magnetism. Mesmerism is a whole side conversation that we could have someday. I'd love to have that one. It's a early form of hypnosis that kind of also involves some pseudoscientific understanding of electricity and magnets. It's almost like an early form of steampunk, but with a bit of a theology to it. It's really interesting. They were building giant devices full of water that carried electrical charges, and then people were supposed to grab these large jugs and shock themselves, and this would cure them of various ills. We still have some of these. Some of them are still exist in Paris. They can produce a great deal of electricity. They're just giant batteries, basically. Gobelin did not understand hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics weren't understood until the Rosetta Stone by Champollion over in Egypt when Napoleon moved in. So he fabricated a complete history just based on what he thought Egyptian mythology was going to be about, but also he felt that Egyptian mythology was probably closer to Greco-Roman mythology, so he merges the two. For example, he makes the emperor Jupiter, he makes the empress Juno, and then he also throws in, Set and Isis and Osiris and other cards. So it's interesting stuff, and he's doing his best, and clearly he's talking to, possible experts, but he's the first person that we have actually putting down words on what any of this means. So it's great, fantastic fun to read. I love that book. He's got some interesting theories. He doesn't assign the four suits to elements in any way. He holds them to the Greco-Roman concept of the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. That's what he goes through. It's an odd way to do it. Fascinating book, really quick and easy to read, hard to get a translation of. It took me about a year and a half to get a copy of it in English. And bad Egyptology is part of tarot. It's just baked into it. That's unfortunate. This era of Egyptology was a lot of hypothesis and conjecture, and sort of looking into Egyptology and seeing things that they wanted to see, that sort of moved into this theory of a universal early religion that all Near Eastern cultures would have shared. That turned out to be nonsense, but it was important to this time in tarot narrative. And divination did not yet exist with the tarot at this time. That was not yet invented. So at this time, they were just purely meditative tools. And when we get into Kabbalah, I'll kind of theorize into why I think that's so. But it's not until a gentleman named Jean-Baptiste Alliette, who uses scrambles his name around and makes it Atea, which means star or something to that effect. And he's the first to really use tarot for divination. He's also the first to assign the court cards and the suits to the classical elements: fire, water, air, and earth. And he was also the first to attack astrology, and he put elements in there. He was also the first to divide the deck into major arcana and minor arcana. He's the first person to do that. Now, a couple of years down, Marie-Anne Lenormand is a fascinating figure. She is a post-revolutionary cartomancer. She kind of builds her own life narrative about her story. I don't know how much of it is true, but she winds up working for the Empress Josephine under Napoleon. She's not using tarot at all. And this is where the French kind of lose interest in tarot, because she moves into just using mundane playing cards with her own system attached. And it's a cool deck. If you can get a copy of the Lenormand deck, I love it. It's actually simpler than the tarot deck. It makes more sense, and it's more conversational. so you can have a really good conversation in there with it. So it's more of a middle class tea party kind of deal with her. She makes cartomancy respectable. It's the sort of thing that the ladies would get together and do after the men had retired to have their cigars and brandy. She makes it possible for normal people to be interested in this hobby. But Lenormand deck. So maybe someday I will do a lesson on how that deck works. It's very fascinating. I love the Lenormand deck. We get then over to Eliphas Levi, who's the first believer in tarot. He's the first one who believes that there is a supernatural slash long-term divine arc to the cards. He's the first person that does that. His name was Alphonse Louis Constant. He's kind of a fire plug shaped man. He left the priesthood to become an occultist. He was originally a priest. He moves to Britain, where he becomes a necromancer for hire. I really recommend his book, Transcendental Magic, where he lays out a very fanciful tale on his adventures in necromancy. It's fascinating stuff. He claims to have summoned the ghost of Apollonius of Tyana, who was an early competitor to Christ, to prove to a famous aristocrat who may or may not be Queen Victoria. He doesn't say, to just prove that he has the goods. He also is obsessed with all of the details of necromancy. He's got a lot of details on like how many skulls do you have, how many dead cats do you have to have, stuff like that. He's fascinating to read because he's very detailed and weird. He's a real wackadoo, and I recommend him to anybody. He's great. Later on, he does start talking about tarot, and he gets really interested in the devil and the Wheel of Fortune. And he keeps promising, I'll tell you more later in my next book. He never gets around to the next book, but he does lay out his beliefs on the devil and the Wheel of Fortune. And they broadly line up to what, people nowadays, understand those cards to be. And he was never a member of a secret society because he was, still for what he was, a broadly practicing Catholic. So he had no desire to join any sort of Masonic society, despite also being a necromancer. So complex figure, weird guy, fascinating writer. There's a couple translations. A.E. Waite's translation is a little stodgy. So try to get maybe a newer translation that keeps the rhythm of his speaking or his writing style intact. It's a very French style of conversation that the English don't really do so well. So the newer translations try to keep that in there. He's also the guy who designed the Baphomet symbol that you've seen, the symbol of the Satanic Temple. He designed that. It's ironic that they took this, a former priest to take this symbol. And Aleister Crowley would, of course, later claim that he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi. You can take that as you may. I don't adhere to that, but that's important to Aleister Crowley to understand. He believed he was the reincarnation of this man. Later, a lot of the details from Levi's texts wind up being part of the Golden Dawn corpus of work. Now, to kind of explain the Golden Dawn, they were originally a side degree of Freemasonry that split off and became its own culture. It was integrated. Men, women, people of different classes could join this organization. So it was very popular, especially among the literate class at the time. There were three founders. You don't really know any except one. His name was William Westcott. And he claimed to have been given an order by a German individual named Fräulein Sprengel. And Fräulein Sprengel was a representative of the Ascended Masters, which, if you know your Blavatsky, are sort of these invisible secret wizards that secretly run the world. And so when they founded the Golden Dawn, they used a mythology that Fräulein Sprengel had received, had given them approval to found this secret society. Nobody has ever proven that Fräulein Sprengel ever existed. Most historians believe that that was a hoax. Later on, one of the three founders, who was actually a mortician for the British government, left a briefcase of all of the Golden Dawn's notes in a cab. And this set off a chain of events which ultimately resulted in the first three founders of the Golden Dawn basically having to leave because they were all well-to-do British professionals. And if the news were to find out that they were all also members of this, occultic secret society, that would have ruined their careers. So one of them voluntarily leaves. The other one stops coming around later and kind of just leaves Westcott. Eventually, Westcott gets bored and hands it over to a guy named Samuel McGregor Mathers. Mathers is quite a character as well. He's obsessed with the notion that he is Scottish. There's no evidence that he ever actually was, but he would walk around wearing a full, Scottish Highland outfit. He was he was a self-taught literate guy. He was a working class man who taught himself all of this information himself. And then there was also the other half of the Golden Dawn were Irish nationalists. So you get very literate Irish writers living in England, all of whom really want to push toward Irish republicanism. People like Yeats, people like Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker's wife, and folks like that were all really more interested in the political details. Now, at this time, a young man named Aleister Crowley comes onto the scene, and he's a stodgy upper middle class Tory that went to Cambridge, very right leaning, and he's so repugnant to the Irish side of the team that they just break off with him entirely, and they refused to push Crowley up past a certain degree. He's not allowed into the second order of the Golden Dawn, and Crowley takes this personally, as he should. So Crowley goes to Mathers, who at this time had moved to Paris with his wife Maura, and he becomes Mathers's right-hand man. Mathers gives him the promotion that he wanted, and then Crowley is later sent off to basically take over the London Lodge, which fails disastrously, and W.B. Yeats, a hulking brute of a man who wear little pince nez glasses and looks like the Penguin, threw him down a flight of stairs. It's a great story, and all sorts of folks would say that didn't happen. Well, the people telling you it didn't happen are all fellow mates, so take that as what you may. And response to this, Crowley then puts all of that information from the Golden Dawn into his magazine, The Equinox, which is 10 very thick volumes. It is a full bookshelf. It's basically his zine. It's Aleister Crowley's zine. He puts all of these Golden Dawn secrets in there. That's the main course, but he's also, putting his plays and his essays and his book reviews, and it's basically the Aleister Crowley magazine. But the main draw of it is he's spilling the Golden Dawn secrets. This ultimately results in a lawsuit, which Crowley wins, but it's a Pyrrhic victory. He doesn't get anything out of it. Everybody in London considers him, a heinous oath breaker. And at the time when secret societies were popular, that's not a thing you want to be. So he also never actually gets to join Freemasonry as he wanted. He had to go to Mexico City and buy his degrees, which of course resulted in him being laughed out of every lodge he, subsequently joined. Also during this time, he goes and attempts to perform what's called the Abramelin ritual, which he's trying to summon his own guardian angel into physical form, so that he can then unite with his guardian angel, and it's a very long, complicated, um, very expensive process that takes 9 months and involves a lot of fasting and no sex, no alcohol, all the sorts of things Aleister Crowley is not built to do very well. So halfway through, he gives up and he goes and marries basically his beard, Rose Kelly, who's the sister of a guy that he may or may not have been fucking on the side. They go on a honeymoon to Egypt after this lawsuit. Basically to cool off a bit. They get down there, and he writes the book of the law. We'll get into that later. And the Golden Dawn really just kind of falls apart with World War One. It just doesn't survive after that. There's smaller offshoots, like for example, New Zealand has a really long-living branch that lasted well into the 1960s, 1970s. And one of the one person who comes on board is a man named Francis Israel Regardi. He's a young British American. He decides to he lies to his parents and becomes Aleister Crowley's secretary, and is ironically never given any information from Crowley at all, because Crowley is an anti-Semite and treats Israel Regardi like shit. And so eventually Regardi quits. He just can't put up with it anymore. Famously, he called on the way out. He goes, "Aleister, you're a contemptible little bitch," and slams the door and walks out. So it's a very bitchy little circle. Crowley is an unpleasant figure who everybody hates. And then there's an American over in California named Paul Foster Case, who's kind of the last remnant of the true Golden Dawn. He actually served as the Praemonstrator, which was lead teacher of the Golden Dawn. And he starts building his own curriculum called the Builders of the Adytum, which is a correspondence course that is still available to this day on tarot. He takes all of the tarot information from the Golden Dawn. He removes anything he doesn't like he does not like ritual magic. He doesn't like the language of Enochian. He thinks a lot of the stuff in later degrees of Golden Dawn is just not relevant. So he focuses on the tarot, and a lot of theory that we have about tarot now comes from Case's beliefs. They still operate. I'm a member today. I'm definitely not giving you a sales pitch, but I think they're very well put together. He's got some wackier theories, but I think if you just want to really dig into the Golden Dawn, you can't really do better than the Builders of the Adytum at this point. So you can kind of put him as the last remaining true Golden Dawn legacy. However, since the 1990s, there's been what's called the open source Golden Dawn movement, and that is taking all of this information and doing it yourself through a path of self-initiation. And so that's also available. It's a lot of work. It's fascinating stuff, and a lot of it is purely mental. So, but if you wanted to go down that path, that does exist. Just brief information on Crowley, just because he's kind of vital to what we're going to be talking about. He's a really rich kid. He's from a Plymouth Brethren family. Plymouth Brethren are sort of like extreme Baptists. They adhere to a theory called the dispensationalism theory, which is that God has 7 covenants with mankind over the course of human history, and we're currently in the church dispensation. I also grew up a Baptist, so I was also kind of trained in this as a kid. But Crowley never really actually understands what dispensationalism about, but he's pulling out information from it, and he creates his own theory of aeonology, which is wackadoo. He goes to Cambridge. there he's likely initiated into, or recruited, I should say, into British intelligence because his side career is as a mountaineer. He's the first like celebrity mountaineer, as especially like the climbs of Everest are going. He was the first person to attempt to climb K2. Killed a couple Chinese people up there after he forgot to buy them shoes and they complained. So not a great guy. However, this allowed him to cross national borders really easily, and it was really easy to carry coded material in there. So it's a really plausible alibi that a lot of his occultism was actually just a cover for being an intelligence agent. He was refused admittance into the Second Order of the Golden Dawn. He was openly bisexual. This was a time when you were not allowed to be that, and that prevented his progress in that community. He became Mathers's cat's paw, basically. Stormed into the Isis Urania Lodge, I believe it was called. Demands to be given the keys. W.B. Yeats, who would later win a Nobel Prize for poetry, so he's not exactly a thug. Picks him up, throws him down the stairs, kicks his ass. At this point, Crowley's out of the Golden Dawn. He buys a house on Loch Ness to begin his Abramelin ritual. He only finishes it halfway through. If you believe in magic, this might be sort of the source of his problem. You don't really want to start, a major magical working like that while not finishing it, and that may have resulted in him believing that he had a secondary character speaking to him that he was channeling named Aiwas. Aiwas is whatever spiritual being is giving Crowley this information. You can also possibly theorize that a lot of it might have been a joke, but that's neither here nor there. He rented the Great Pyramid, which you could do in those days, and he had sex with his wife in the sarcophagus after attempting to summon sylphs, which are the air spirits. Excuse me. After that point, Rose starts exhibiting mediumistic activity and behavior. She leads him to the Cairo Museum, where she finds a stele, a grave marker, basically marked number 666, exhibit 666. And Aleister Crowley, of course, believes this is wildly important. Rose couldn't possibly just be fucking with him. So he takes this as verification that something is about to happen. Rose then says, "Hey, they're going to come talk to you. You need to sit at your desk for 3 consecutive nights." He does so, and he writes the Book of the Law, which establishes his theory of aeonology, that being that history is divided into different aeons or eras, each reigned by a specific Egyptian god. So it starts with Isis in the far distant past. He believes the Margaret Murray witch cult theory, which has been fully discredited by now, but he believes that in the far distant past there was sort of an ideal matriarchal society that was then usurped by the religion of Osiris, which he conflates with Christianity. He's one of these people, and you'll see this in the occult community a lot. There's this kind of belief that, oh, Christianity is bad. We need to get back to the old religion. And he, of course, states that when he writes this book, 1904, the new aeon, the aeon of Horus, has begun. He uses the word thelema, which means will, as his holy magical word. All of his spells involve this word. And it becomes the basis of his own religion, which was frequently at the time just referred as Crowleyanity. He had a massive messiah complex. He not only wanted to be, the Antichrist, but he also wanted to be Christ at the same time, which is illogical. But he's got a real main character syndrome. Just everything is about him. He is always positioning himself as the most important occultist who has ever lived. The way you can read a lot of Thelema books and never once understand that everyone else thought of him as a joke. And that's kind of a problem with Thelema. A lot of people never actually read anything parallel to him, so they take him at his word, and that's where you get a lot of culty type behaviors, especially in the Ordo Templi Orientis, which I have some experience with, and I'm not a big fan of. But Crowley also becomes enthused with this writer, Arthur Edward Waite. Waite was a Freemason who wanted to make it his business to join every Masonic offshoot he possibly could. He's got this book called the Masonic Encyclopedia. It's about 800 pages long, and it's just lists of every degree that you could get, and then also whether or not he got them. It's every lodge in the world has a copy of this book. It's a very important book. Later on, Waite finds Crowley's willingness to break oaths kind of problematic with his goal of being the most Masonic man alive. And also, he doesn't care for Crowley's lifestyle. They break off their friendship. Crowley tries to spin this, and oh no, Waite, he goes like, oh no, Waite wanted what I have, and he came to me begging to have what I have, but I turned him away. Atlas shrugged. The problem with Waite is he's very dull. He's a very dull, awful writer. He also has the problem where he spells F's as S's, or vice versa, S's as F's. It's very annoying to read. If somebody were to just take his books and resolve that problem, he'd be a lot more popular. Waite then decides, hey, I've got all this information on tarot. I'm going to start building my own tarot deck, and I'm going to sell it as a mass market product. So he hires an American artist named Pamela Coleman, basically a manic pixie dream girl in the Victorian era, like just a sparkling woman, apparently entirely self-taught artist. And so she does the art. Waite gives her a lot of freedom to design the cards, which kind of means the Waite Coleman deck, which is what we call it now. For the longest time, it was called the Rider Waite deck because it was printed by the Rider Company. But we now call it the Waite Coleman deck so that we can give Coleman her due. But not always do the pictures that Coleman drew match up with what Waite was intending the card to be. So there is that issue. However, Waite's deck becomes the most popular deck in the world, especially through Hammer horror films. I think Hammer horror kind of solidified that. Every time somebody's reading tarot cards in a Hammer horror film, it's a Waite deck. So the public starts to expect, hey, a tarot deck looks like the Waite Coleman deck. Crowley gets very jealous of this, and he decides to do his own. During World War II, they get together. They're all kind of unable to leave the country. Also, Crowley's very obsessed with the Rudolf Hess affair, and he's begging Ian Fleming, of all people, to be allowed to interview Hess. Ian Fleming says no. Ian Fleming would later say that Le Chiffre in the James Bond series was based on Crowley. So that kind of confirms to me his British intelligence connection, but your mileage may vary. Lady Frida Harris is the artist. She comes to him and says, hey, I will do the art for you if you will give me instruction on how to be a high magician. He makes that deal. He's teaching her how to be a magician. She's drawing these cards for him. He's particular about his cards. And there's, multiple versions of every card that he would reject that are out there. For example, there's like one, it's common now to print the Thoth deck, which is what it becomes, with multiple versions of the magician, because she liked one version more than the one he picked. Nowadays, I recommend both decks. I think they're great. I think the Waite deck is what people want out of a tarot deck. The Thoth deck is the easier way to learn tarot, if that makes sense. I think the problem with the Thoth deck, of course, is that there's some thelemic tweaks that you might not really want to have anything to do with. So that's all personal. That's entirely how you do. One advantage of the Thoth deck is that it's much larger than the Coleman deck typically, and so if you want a deck that you can actually see the art on and really focus on, that's the one to get. Beautiful surrealist modernist artwork. I think Lady Frida was just an expert in what she did, and it's a beautiful deck. Crowley is a controversial figure. I both love him and hate him. He's an interesting guy. So when we're gonna select a deck, I'm gonna focus on these two decks, but really it has to do with whether and whatever you want to do. Both decks are derived ultimately from the Golden Dawn corpus, which was a list that students in the Golden Dawn were given, just written down in text, in handwriting text. They were only allowed to make handwritten notes. They were not allowed to take it. It was just locked in a room. When they were given permission to go look at it, they were locked in it and they had to write it down by hand. And then they were expected to draw their own cards from these descriptions. And then they were also expected not to share those cards with others. So they didn't do public readings for other people. And they did not yet have images for the small cards at all. They were just, if you had an 8 of cups, draw 8 cups. If you have a 2 of wands, draw 2 wands. We also don't really say the word Trump anymore for obvious reasons. Those of us, who aren't enormous fans of our president, we just don't like saying the word very much. So a lot of us readers have just stopped using it, and we've adopted Crowley's term of Atu, which is an ancient Egyptian word. It's probably nonsense, but it works. But again, I don't like to use the word Trump. Pamela Coleman then, what her main contribution was adding relevant pictures to the small cards, and that helped tarot take off considerably, because learning the small cards is the hard part of tarot. It's so complicated. I can make it a little bit easier for you by just simplifying the system out to you, but the small cards are what stumps a lot of people. Just a moment. Crowley publicized that list of cards in his Equinox, and so people now had the information and were able to do it themselves. Also, it's a wartime deck. It's being painted during the Blitz, so there's it has a certain energy to it of a World War II era thing. I really recommend ignoring his actual textbook that comes with it, the Book of Thoth. It's absolute garbage. He's totally whacked out on heroin and cocaine. Ignore it completely. And also, by the way, the company that prints it sometimes prints some of the pages upside down. It's a shit book. I don't like it. I stick to these two, though, because they do have a general consensus. There's a few tweaks between the two, and I think Waite Coleman can be a little lazy, and I think the Thoth deck can be a little too thalamic. So it's a give or take. Sometimes I stick to these two decks just because the consensus of interpretation is there. And Waite Coleman, if you're doing a reading for others, that's the one you pick. Don't bring Barbie's First Tarot if you're reading a tarot for somebody who's not a tarot reader themselves. They don't want that. They want the images of the Waite Coleman deck. It's just a pure showmanship issue. The Thoth deck is great. It's got brilliant art in it. It has all of the zodiacal attributions, all of the Hebrew letters. Again, some of the cards are backwards. We'll get into that, but yeah, it's an issue. And then Paul Foster Case. He's an American down in California. I like to call him the Neville Longbottom to Crowley's Harry Potter. If Crowley is the main character of magic, Paul Foster Case is the guy who's got the actual chops. He claims that he was authorized by a Master R from the Third Order, which, if the Golden Dawn is based on Fräulein Sprengel, you might as well be, Papa Smurf. It doesn't really matter. But that was his claim to fame. In fact, he had been kicked out by Mathers's wife after Mathers died, just because he was a bit of a prude. But that's not necessarily bad for him to be a prude. He focused entirely on the tarot, and he really gets heavily into the Hebrew of it. And he designed his own deck, which is kind of a merge between the two decks, kind of half Thoth, half Wait Coleman. But it's printed in black and white. You are intended to color it yourself. He's a very complicated set of instructions on, you have to color these exactly as he instructs, the idea being that it would soak into your mind and become a spiritualized effort for you. He also has this concept called the cube of space, which is every plane on a cube, every line, and an XYZ axis within the cube all represent cards of the tarot, which allows, if you're the sort of person who can think three-dimensionally and imagine things, you can actually figure out different connections between the cards that you might not get by just looking at them on a table. That's very highly advanced tarot. We're not going to go over it, but it's a fascinating, like, spiritualized version. He is also, he tries to spiritualize the sex magic part of the Golden Dawn. He sort of, he himself is a bit of a prude, but also he sort of understands, hey, a woman can, understand and appreciate the phallic aspects of men, and a man can understand feminine aspects. Why there's no reason to limit these. He's also a little bit more open on issues of homosexuality and gender. So he's not bad. He's a decent guy. And he uses it, again, less as a divinatory tool. He does have those instructions, but he's more of a new thought guy. He's more about using it for self-improvement, self-analysis, almost like a highly effective, or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People kind of thing. But most importantly, what he did was he laid the cards out in 3 rows of 7 and moved the Fool out of the 3 rows. And this allows you to have a really interesting system which allows you to understand the trumps quickly. We'll get into that, but he divides them into agency, methodology, and consequence. Really a brilliant, fascinating way to do it. And he lays it out fairly openly early on in the course. So later, in Golden Dawn system, that would have been, toward the end when you're about to move into the second order. He moves that up right to the front. And also, he's really obsessed with color symbolism, sound symbolism. Everything on a tarot deck has a million different attributions to things all over the place, and he's the guy that's really crunchy about it, is going to explain all that. And nowadays, we've got what I call the torrent of bullshit. Tarot's very popular right now, more so than ever. It's very easy to print a tarot deck, and Disney has a tarot deck. Star Trek: The Next Generation has a tarot deck. Barbie, as I said, there's a Pokemon one that's ironically not that bad, but it has just kind of resulted in sort of chaos. And sometimes they will look like Wait Coleman cards, but the artist has no understanding of what these cards mean, and so it doesn't really mean the same thing. In the 80s, of course, there was the Satanic Panic. Christians labeled the tarot as, the most evil thing you can own, whereas in reality, early tarot practitioners are very Christian. There's a lot of Hebrew in there as well, a lot of Jewishness, a little bit of Islam, but by and large, tarot is a Christian phenomenon. Let's not forget that. And so in response to that, Christians who are worried about the Satanic Panic start creating their own variations, which don't make any sense at all. They're called oracle cards, sometimes angel cards. It's just a basic form of sortilege where there's a card there's a Bible verse or something on it, and you're supposed to use that. You might as well just be rolling a pair of dice. Um, Internet culture has a lot of urban legends that have kind of soaked into appreciation of tarot at this point. So angel numbers, which are complete nonsense. There's a sort of a emerging folk religion called the new demonology, and it's kind of tied in with the apostolic reform movement that the right wing is really into right now. There's been a lot of sort of just delusional opinions on this stuff that is being spat out on the internet. And so just owning a tarot deck to some people is basically saying, I'm the high priest of Satan. And it's just completely irrational. This is David Icke QAnon kind of conspiracy thinking. And also, horror films, music videos, rap videos, video games, keyboarding of the dead frequently use the tarot imagery just because it's spooky. Marilyn Manson had a tarot deck, and it, not that great of one, but it's that tarot just means spooky now. Like you can buy a tarot deck at Spirit Halloween. It's just become a prop, and so because of that, I really limit myself to Waite Coleman and Thoth. I own a couple other flavor decks, but those are just for fun. I don't really use them. But I really kind of recommend staying away from a deck that you buy at Spencer's Gifts that has all the Disney princesses on it, because it's just not going to do anything for you. You're just going to be thinking about, oh, hey, Snow White is the high priestess. Isn't that interesting? You're going to be missing the deeper values of that. So brief intermission. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, we'll be back in 2 to 3 minutes. Everybody back? Who's gonna be here for the second half?
I never left.
Okay. I guess we'll get started back up then. Okay, so tarot is going to be based on numbers, and the key number you need to understand is 10, particularly 0 through 9, but that's 10 numbers. Once you understand these numbers, you can understand your deck and will be able to use this information to quickly speed you through learning things about the cards that you just wouldn't have any access to if you just read the little white book that came with your cards. There are two completely parallel systems of 10-based numerology. There is the Pythagorean Decad, also known as the Tetractys, and there's the Kabbalah with a Q. Why do we spell it like that? Because we want to be respectful of the fact that this is a living tradition still practiced by Jews to this day. So we want to signal, hey, we're amateurs, we're not claiming to be rabbis, and we're also going to not adhere to strictly traditional Jewish interpretations. It's a sign of respect. It's not denigratory in any way. The Pythagorean Decad uses a system of 10 dots called the Tetractys, and the Kabbalah uses the Tree of Life, and both are equally valid, and understanding both will help you out a lot. they're similar, they're not identical, and it's likely they probably developed within conversation with each other at some point. Um, I don't know which came first. It's purely so far in the past, information is so sparse. They might be completely parallel and just an instance of coincidental thinking, um, or they might have been in direct conversation with each other. It's hard to really understand that, but all you need to understand: 10 fingers, 10 toes. 10 is going to be your core number. There's going to be, we're going to go over those numbers, and that will get you set up for the next class we have, which is going to start using all this information. Um, the Tetractys, as you can see, is 10 dots of 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 4 levels of this, and it's outlined in a book that's called The Theology of Arithmetic by Iamblichus. It's a very small book, and it's one of the densest, most difficult to understand books that I've ever read. I've been reading it consistently for about 4 years now, and I'm still not entirely understanding every single aspect of it. I have a broad idea, but it's hard stuff for those of us not fully steeped in ancient Greek mathematics. Um, but these 4 numbers are they symbolize the musica universalis, or the music of the spheres. We got 1, which is the monad and means unity. 2, the dyad, which means power / limit / unlimited. We'll get more into that. The triad is harmony. Again, we'll get into that. And the 4 is cosmos, the universe. So all of these add up to 10. This was called the decad. These also represent the 4 classical elements: fire, water, air, and earth. That's important because that also comes in later when we talk about Kabbalah. They came to the same conclusion. This symbol was really key to the Pythagorean belief, and it's actually where we get the word calculus from, because they would lay these out with individual pebbles. Calculus just means pebbles. Early Christians were very impressed by this, and Catholic bishops to this day still use a little tetractys on their heraldry. If you see it, it looks like tassels now, but they're laid out in the form of a tetractys. Early Christians had a great amount of awe for Pythagoras, and he's frequently sort of believed to be one of those virtuous pagans before the coming of Christ. And the tree of life, 10 is sort of the return or the descent of God. It's emanationist. They use this as a meditative tool. It's a mnemonic device. You can categorize things by it. It's a diagram of God's emanations as you go from, cosmic God down to all of the individual levels of God down to you. The theory being you are, part of the divine system, and so therefore you are basically a polyp on the side of the vast mossy log that is God. It was supposedly devised by angels, given to Adam after the fall from Eden to help him out. And he taught that to the biblical patriarchs all the way down to Enoch, who is very vital to a lot of occult beliefs. Enoch, of course, is the first instance of a raptured character. He's taken by God. He doesn't have to die. God just picks him up and takes him straight to heaven. So that's very vital to this story. Moses and Solomon are both considered the early masters of Kabbalah. Particularly, Moses is seen, as the perfect master. Solomon is sort of the great practical master of it. Both of them are, other cultures would call them sorcerers, but within Jewish, they're great, holy figures. So how you look at these things kind of depends on where you are in the Near East. It was rediscovered by a guy named Rabbi Akiva, who was a contemporary of Christ. We do know he exists, and we actually probably know a little bit more that he exists more than Christ did. But Christ himself cites terminology of this in the Lord's Prayer. If you know the Lord's Prayer, it ends with the kingdom, the power, and the glory. All 3 of these words are Sephiroth, and there's some hints when you read that Bible that, oh, the story of him, as a young man talking in the temple with the old teachers. How did he get this information? Well, internally to Christian belief, it's that he's God, so he has this knowledge inherently. That's impressive to early Kabbalists who would go, how did the kid know this? Originally, to know this information, you had to be male, married, and over the age of 40. Therefore, Christ would not have been initiated into it because he died by 33. If you count these, there is an 11th. That's called Dot or Doth. Doesn't actually exist. It signifies knowledge or gnosis. It's not considered accurate to Orthodox Jewish Kabbalah, and it's just sort of a later invention, so it's not part of it. But they usually list it in there because that's just where it is. It's not useful. 11 doesn't work for tarot, so we don't use it. If you zigzag, if you zigzag down, you create what's called the Sword of Michael. So the fiery Sword of Michael, after Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, God positions 4 angels outside of it with fiery swords to prevent them from getting back in. If you go upwards in a zigzag pattern, that's the serpent crawling up the tree, leading you to believe that you could be like God. Either way, that's just how that's referred to. There's an enormous quantity of literature on this, both from Orthodox Jewish information to Christian, Muslim, New Age, what have you. There's just an enormous quantity of text on this. If you really want to go with the Orthodox beliefs on it, I really recommend Gershom Scholem, who was a World War II survivor, who was really crucial in kind of giving the Orthodox interpretation of this to outsiders. So I really recommend Gershom Scholem. It's very complicated. It's very in depth. So I'm not going to be going into all of the crazy details of it. But just understand here is up here in Kether. That's God. That's God the Father. That's the universal God. That's the entirety of the universe personified, and it wiggles on down through all of these stations, each time getting a little bit less God, until you're winding down here in Malkuth. You can pronounce it either way. And Malkuth is us here on the planet Earth. The theory being, of course, that as above, so below, which is a Gnostic / Hermetic slogan. What happens out there in the greater cosmos is the lower world is just a reflection of that. So if you have a hand, God also has a hand. If you have 2 eyes, God also has 2 eyes. That sort of thing. Each path between these is assigned a Hebrew letter, a tarot, a number, a color, a musical note, a plane or line on the cube of space, and all sorts of other things. A useful thing Crowley did was he put these all in a book called 777, and I really recommend it. It's one of the most useful books you can own for tarot purposes, because it's also going to explain gematria and notarikon, which are methods of using the Kabbalah to come up with other ways to interpret Hebrew. It's also an easy way to drive yourself insane. Getting too far into numerology beyond just understanding, what they externally symbolize from a theological perspective, can make you start believing that you have that you have a close connection to God, which you don't. And it's kind of a self-induced situational schizophrenia that happens. I've seen people go completely stark raving mad getting too far into it. So be very careful with it. A simple external knowledge of it, great. Mwah, lovely. Don't go too far into gematria, and certainly, dear God, don't start telling people your theories on gematria. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. B, anything you make up can be contradicted by anybody else also understanding gematria. It's completely subjective. And 3, you'll look like a total lunatic. So I don't recommend talking about that stuff with other people. It's an ugly look. And for fans of comic books, Tifereth here, also signifying beauty or the Messiah, has eight legs. And Stan Lee later, said that Spider-Man is represented by that, and and when he created Spider-Man with Steve Ditko, he was thinking about that. So take that as what you may, but that's a fun comic book detail. This can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. For example, the mnemonic method. The mnemonic method is how to just learn the names of God, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the numbers that those letters represent. It's a pure mnemonic device. The emanationist view is to see God up here at the top and God basically filtering down through ever finer grades of godliness, getting down here to you, and you are a part of that emanation. That's the flaming sword method. There's also the reflective method, which is really key to Christian Kabbalah. And yes, there is a Christian strain of Kabbalah, and the guy behind that was named Pico de Mirandola. He's got basically a trinity of trinities can be found in the Kabbalah. You've got the supernal triangle, which is the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. God looks down upon the world, sees his own reflection, and that's the world of ethics and law and mercy and justice. And beneath that are the astral ramifications of that internal Trinity. So again, you have 3 Trinities: so Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's called the reflective interpretation. Kind of complicated. We're not going to get into that. And then there's the elevationist / illuminist method of reading it, which is the theory, of course, that you're down here in Malkuth. If you were to use magic and meditation and whatnot, you can work your way back up to become a god yourself. That's we're not going to be talking too much about that. That involves a lot of things. I also think Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, might have had some clue into that, but didn't fully understand what he was talking about. And so a lot of Mormonism seems to be reflecting this, but through a largely misunderstood set of terminology. So we're going to get with the numbers. We're going to get fun now. We're going to use Muppets. So we're going to start with the numbers. 0 is a number, but it is not a number. I want you to think of tarot 0 like a binary. 0 is going to represent off. 1 is going to represent on. A 0 is absolutely nothing. Never try to think of 0 as representing something. Or don't even think about it as representing a hole or a void. There's not even a void. There's nothing there. Crowley, of course, had a slogan around this. I assert the absoluteness of the Kabbalistic 0. It's a bullshit phrase he said, but I love the way it sounds. The point is, 0 means 0. 0 isn't a placeholder for something. There's no concept of what that void is. It's just nothing. If something exists at all, it cannot be 0. If something exists and seeks to understand 0, what it figures out pierces into 0 and just becomes part of what is known, and so therefore loses its 0-ness. And 0 was first introduced in India. It spread through Muslim channels, and then it became really vital to higher mathematics. Pythagoras had no understanding of 0 whatsoever. He did not believe that if you didn't have something that you could even talk about it, because it doesn't exist. 1 is unity, and again, think of it like the binary. 0 is off, 1 is on. All subsequent numbers are basically just divisions of 1. It's like cellular mitosis. Think about it like that. 1 is unity, it's totality, it's everything that exists everywhere in the universe. It's just that is the one. Zero exists outside of whatever exists. So one and zero are never actually going to merge until we get to 10, but that's not quite the same. This is what's called the monad. This becomes an important philosophical concept down the road. The philosopher Leibniz wrote Monadology, which he kind of explains this as a simple substance, which is similar to the way we moderns think about the atom, and that there's nothing smaller than that. Well, we now know that there are things smaller than an atom, or there parts that interlock with it. But for our purposes, a monad is a simple substance that is entirely self-contained. The monad looks inward at itself. It never looks outward because there's nothing out there to look at. Just think of it a vast, giant sphere or egg that everything that exists is within it. And to Pythagoras, this was the most sacred number that could possibly be. He didn't really explain his theories of it unless you were his closest advanced students. That could take anywhere between 6 to 10 years to deserve that privilege. And also, you were sworn to secrecy and silence until you got there. That's where Scientology gets the word auditor, just means listener. He got that from Pythagoras. To be a student of Pythagoras was to be an auditor, to be solely silent and just listen to him talk. And if you swore by the monad, it was placing your life at stake. It was the most important thing that you could swear by. Two is, again, think about it like cell division. Two is dividing one in half. There might be two monads theoretically, but they're never going to interact because monads are completely self-sufficient. So don't think of it as two things. Think of it as dividing the one in half. Two is also the most evil number, according to Pythagoras, and you were supposed to hiss when it was mentioned. It was an evil number. It signifies division, and it creates the thesis and the antithesis of the Hegelian dialectic, which would come much later, and the Hegelians would have a lot of conversation about what thesis and antithesis mean. Just remember, if you have one thing and you have an absolute opposite of it, that's a thesis and an antithesis. So light as opposed to dark. Now, of course, there's a lot of shades in between light and dark. That's where 3 comes in. And Crowley said 0 equals 2 because if 1 has an opposite, it would be -1, and that would equal 0. I don't fully understand that. I think his essay on it is weird and stupid. I don't particularly care for it, but he was obsessed with this point. 3, like we said, there's the shades of gray in the middle. 3 is going to be the synthesis between the thesis and the antithesis, or the thing that connects the two. So if you've got light and dark, the synthesis is going to be the twilight between the two. 3 is the number of peace and balance. So 3 is going to be sacred to your Christians as the Trinity, so the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. 3 is sacred to the Hindus as Brahma, Krishna, and Shiva. 3 was sacred in Egyptian mythology, so Isis, Osiris, Horus. 3 is key to Burnsian transactional analysis, which was 1960s pop psychology that I particularly like. So adult, parent, and child. And Freudian analysis, of course, has id, ego, and superego. So 3 is a very important number signifying balance. Pretty much everywhere you go. But Pythagoras' key contribution to mathematics is the Pythagorean theorem. So he's obsessed with triangles, which of course allows you to estimate the length of any side of a right-angled triangle. So all of Euclidean geometry that we use, to this day, is derived from Pythagoras' work with triangles. So 3 equals harmony. It's a good number. 4, not an evil number at all, but it does signify a system. 4 is the number of a functioning system. So 4 seasons, 4 letters in the name of God, also known as the Tetragrammaton. 4 worlds of Asaya, we'll get into that. There are 4 cherubim / archangels, depending on what you call them. 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 4 Beatles. 4 elements, 4 humors. It neatly divides the zodiac into 4 groups of 3 signs each. 4 signifies obedience, hard work, discipline, orderliness. There's a quorum aspect there, a stability, and just a general squareness in the Masonic sense of, for something to be square to a Freemason is to be correct. So 4 is, just a thing that is stable, functioning, and correct. 5 is where it gets kind of fun. 5 represents the microcosm, so the individual human being. 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head. It represents a healthy human. Obviously, there are humans that exist that don't have arms or legs. Most humans have a head, though. And these are all united by the spirit, which is the 5th element, which you've all seen that film. So 5 represents the functioning human being of those of us down here on Earth. The pentagram is an important occult symbol. It's going to be on your pentacle. It's a greeting symbol, which would be drawn in the air with your fingers. It was called Hygeia, and it means health. Levi thought it was the highest possible talisman you could possess. Wanted the Catholics to find ways to approximate it through other metals that they had, because he was, of course, a functioning Catholic. It's still used by magicians in the banishing and invoking pentagram rituals. An ideal Masonic lodge is 5 officers, so a worshipful master, senior and junior wardens, a treasurer, and a secretary. That's kind of your minimum Masonic lodge. And a pentagram pointed upwards would symbolize a functioning, healthy microcosm. A pentagram pointed down would signify a dysfunctional microcosm. However, don't freak out if you see an upside down pentagram. The Victorian Golden Dawn were terrified of that, and so of course, Anton LaVey much later is able to spook people out by just appropriating the upside down pentagram. Don't worry about it. If you want to have a medallion of an upside down pentagram, nothing bad is going to happen to you. Don't worry about it. 6, 1 step higher than 5. Now, on our tree of life, Tifereth is that Messiah. So it's 5 from the bottom and 6 from the top. So it signifies 5 equals 6. Microcosm and macrocosm are very important here. 6 is going to represent the upward triangle of fire united with the downward triangle of water. So it's uniting 2 different worlds. It's a number of union. The seal of Solomon, the Star of David, is a symbol of Israel to this day. It was used in black magic to bind spirits. In the mythology there, God gave it to Solomon because Solomon was the representative of Israel. Solomon served as the microcosm if God is the macrocosm. And it broadly signifies this concept of the chosen people. If Israel represents God's representatives on Earth, again, your mileage may vary on that, then it would make logical sense that the Star of David would signify that. Eliphas Levi would explain this as God is looking up in heaven. He looks down across the still waters of creation and sees a reflection of himself. The reflection of himself is the demiurge, which is the false creator in Gnosticism. So it's the demiurge doesn't actually exist. The demiurge is basically just how we humans, with our limited capability to understand the divine, can appreciate God. It's I've kind of explained it as the demiurge is sort of like how Santa Claus is a child's first introduction to the notion of God. He's older than you. He's wiser than you. He sees everything you do. And if you do something good, he'll reward you. If you do something bad, he'll punish you. So, for a child who can't fully yet grasp all of the broader details of God, Santa Claus might as well be a good enough replacement for that. It's used in ritual magic. There's a greater and lesser hexagram ritual, signifies the 5 planets, the moon and the sun. And there were 6 days spent creating the world in Genesis. So 6 is just the greater universe, the cosmos, the macrocosm, God as the entire functioning system of everything that exists. And the microcosm is the reflection of that, in that you and I are also effectively, little representatives of God down here on Earth. So that's how the two numbers relate. Now, I'm gonna sideline on that. So the rose and cross, there was a possibly non-existent secret society in the 16th century. There was what was called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, where there was going to be a wedding between an admiral who was a Protestant and a Catholic princess, and the Catholic French were incensed that we can't allow a Protestant into the French line of succession. He might make us Protestant like those filthy British. So they, and on St. Bartholomew's Day, killed all the Protestants in Paris, or the ones they could get a hold of. Shortly thereafter, a bunch of propaganda posters started to be nailed up in the middle of the night, and nobody could figure out who was posting them out. And these were letters from the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. Now, these Rosicrucians were invisible, omniscient wizards in your midst that are watching everything you do, that you can't find, you can't kill. They have powers of invisibility and a secret language of their own that can't be cracked. And it was basically, you can read it as a psyop or psychological gamesmanship on behalf of the Protestants to just freak out the Catholics. Basically go, oh yeah, well, maybe we didn't get all of them, and maybe they're plotting something. Or you could also frame it as the Catholics trying to frame the Protestants as a vast occult conspiracy set against the true Church of Catholicism. This brotherhood was led by a wizard with a great name, Christian Rosenkreutz. And the end goal of the Golden Dawn ultimately is to summon the ghost of Christian Rosenkreutz through a very complicated system of replicating a tomb with a coffin in it, and the walls are all decorated with occult symbols and things. And the ultimate goal of the Golden Dawn system, theoretically, is to summon this ghost and get wisdom from him. And of course, his name is Christian Rosenkreutz, which, Rose Cross Christian. It's all part of the mythology. I don't believe he ever existed. But in theory, Christian Rosenkreutz was the founder of this secret society. Now, if you look at your tree of life, you may notice down here on the bottom, this forms a cross. And up here on the top, there's got 6 petals of a flower or rose. Should also be noted that the symbol of the Lutherans was a cross on a heart in the middle of a rose. Might be kind of important. So given that Antoine Court de Gebelin was descended from Huguenots who were the victims of the massacre, he might have been letting something on that he knew, or maybe not. He just might have been completely random on that. But it is it's a Christianized symbol of Kabbalah that signifies the alchemical great work, signifying that the Messiah, Christ, is the unification of microcosm and macrocosm as the man who is also God. So that's important. It's not necessarily important, but it is interesting. That's kind of a sidebar. The number 7 signifies perfection. There's 7 days of the week, 7 classical planets, 7 notes in the musical scale, 7 liberal arts and sciences, 7 dispensations or covenants with God. And this symbolizes when God is actually actively involved in the mundane physical world. So the microcosm is actually using the microcosm to do something. That's what 7 signifies. It's the great work of alchemy, as I said. It's the luckiest number in the Western world, but it's not necessarily the luckiest number everywhere. But that's also why it's on slot machines as the highest payout combination. I've heard, a lot of magicians say that when they, want a good luck ritual, they say their prayer 7 times or 3. It doesn't, it's always different, but I hear 7 quite a lot. 8. 8 is 2 systems, so 4 on top of each other. This forms the cube of space. It signifies a complete cycle. So, it's giving and receiving, and kind of think of it like a 4-stroke engine: intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. It's a full system of giving and receiving. And in Taoist alchemy, it symbolizes yin and yang, a similar concept. So 8's going to be a complete cycle. And 8 is the luckiest number in China and any country that has a Taoist presence. That's why when you go to a casino and play a Chinese slot machine, 8 is the lucky number, not 7. And this, of course, is the cube of space that, again, advanced tarot, not important to know at this point, but I know that the subgeniuses have a fixation with the time cube. Might explain that a bit. 9 signifies completion, so it's 3 times 3. 3 is the first prime in the letters that isn't 1, that's been multiplied by itself. There are 3 triads in the tree of life, as I previously mentioned. It signifies completion, wisdom, humanitarianism, justice, everything kind of being put to rights in the end. So 9 is typically a good number. You might notice that odd numbers tend to be good and even numbers tend to be not so good. Or in the case of 4 it's Pythagoras had a more like obsessive love of odd and a fear of even than Kabbalah does. But to the Pythagoreans, an odd number was good, whereas an even number was bad. So from Kether to Yesod, which is the Sephiroth above Malkuth, that's 9. And so it signifies the entire spiritual world separate from mankind. It ends one complete cycle of 1 through 9. And so 10 is, if you know your just basic metric, starts a new one. And it was a great advantage when we switched from Roman numerals to Arabic numerals, because suddenly we had a concept of 10 and we were able to spare so much time writing out our numbers because we just had it. It was easier. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Just because you might have achieved Kether, that doesn't mean that guy over there, that isn't his starting point, if that makes sense. There's also this other concept of the Klipothic Kabbalah, which I'm not going to talk about, but the Klipothic Kabbalah is the reversed tree of life, signifying evil. And it's not typically Orthodox Kabbalah, and it's more used in the satanic, kind of cultures. I know the Temple of Set loves it, but I don't particularly care to use it. 10 is the 1 and the 0 of the binary. It's the manifestation. It's the start of a new cycle. It represents the 0 next cycle of numbers while adding the 1 each time it repeats the cycle. So 10, 20, 30, 40. You all learned that in 2nd grade. The physical world without the guidance of the spiritual worlds above it, and therefore a flawed creation. So it's you've reached all the way to the top. Now it's just time to start over. And it's typically bad in all suits but pentacles, where it's great because if you have a 10 of pentacles, that's going to be you have manifested the most amount of money that you can manifest. That's it. In all other suits, 10 tends to be bad. In pentacles, it's good. So those are the 10 numbers. The 4 worlds of the Kabbalah are also important to know, because the 4 letters of the name of God, Yod Ha Vav Ha, we pronounce that now Yahweh, or Jehovah. It's actually, the dedicated to the four suits and the four elements. We don't know how to pronounce that name exactly. For it may be possible, a particular lineage of rabbis may know, but for our purposes, that's been lost. It's considered disrespectful to attempt to try to pronounce it. So, for example, when you read a King James Bible, whenever this comes up, they just replace it with the word Lord in all capitals, because it would be disrespectful to attempt to pronounce the correct word directly. It means I am. And so when Moses is out there in the desert seeing the burning bush, God says, I am what I am. You might remember that that's also Popeye's slogan. And that's the direct quotation of God's name, if you were to actually, signify that out and what it means. Each one of these letters is every single stop on the Kabbalah is four distinct worlds of creation layered on top of each other. But I want you to just think about it like this. Absolute is the archetypal. It's also sort of the commander in chief of the military. God thinks of an idea. God says, okay, we're going to take the army and we're going to, invade Afghanistan. Bria is cups. So Yod, of course, is fire, wands. That's, you're gonna have to remember this fire, water, air, earth. Bria, the second one, it represents the generals of the military. These are the cherubim and the seraphim, the higher angels that stay in heaven, and they put together a plan to carry out God's plan to invade Afghanistan. They're like, okay, well, we're gonna need, to move these wings of the military over there, and we're going to start on this date. That's the creative world. Below that is air, the formative world. These are the archangels, or the captains of the military. These are your individual unit leaders. They're all going to be given their orders by the generals. They all have their specific task. They're going to take their sphere of influence and apply it. They're not going to do the hard work, because that's going to be down in Isaiah, which is going to be the normal angels, the foot soldiers. And that's the manifestation world. So the angels are carrying it out, putting it all together. But you can think of the four worlds in a military concept. So ultimately, the angels are the ones actually dying in Afghanistan, whereas the captains are organizing those soldiers, the generals are organizing those captains, and the commander in chief is giving the overarching general order. So Yod, Ha, Vav, Ha, Vav, Ha. You might notice that 2 and 4 are the same letter. That's fine. It's just a thing to just know. I got a really cool knife that a friend made with this on it, laid out in the form of a human being with Yod as a head, the Ha as arms, the Vav as the body, and the He as the lower legs. So that it's important, but the concept of the suits is the most important part. Fire is going to be wands, water is going to be cups, air is going to be swords, earth is going to be pentacles or coins. So we're going to put it all together to sort of outline the 3 parts of your deck so you understand what they do. You're going to have the Trump / Atu. So these are 22 broad archetypes. Paul Foster Case, of course, lays them out in groups of 7, and that's very useful. He removes the Fool entirely. The Fool is important, but he removes it out of the 3 rows of 7. The top row are going to be your agencies, and these are your basically 7 classical planets, if you want to understand that. Very similar concept. These are the 7 general tendencies of the zodiac. The second row is the machinery. These are how the agencies use, or what they use, to manifest the results. So if the agency is using the machinery correctly, then you'll get the results. For example, I'll just use this one. The magician, his machinery is strength, or in the Thoth deck, it's lust. So the magician uses strength or lust and results in devil. The devil represents domination. So the magician is a very like dominating figure. He wants to conduct reality in his own direct way, if that makes sense. And these other cards are all just kind of declensions of that, and we'll get into that next lesson, where we're going to go all over each and every single one of these individually. But that's a general way of thinking about it. The trumps are also, or the Atu are also called the major arcana. The word trump is French or similar for triumph. And you would collect these by certain combinations. These would result in trick points. It's similar to Japanese Hanafuda, if you want to play that. It's just you're collecting these, turning them in for a set number of points. The Atu are great for meditation. We'll kind of get into that maybe in the third lesson. But there's a way to deliberately look at them that kind of that will reward you for really thinking about them. And each symbol has been kind of honed and refined. Each successive artist removes inessentials and adds essentials, or it's generational. These have been honed over centuries, and so kind of what we have now is kind of under the Waite Coleman is kind of the crystallized version of that. There's even some instances, like for example, the Hanged Man quite possibly is upside down, and the Hanged Man, when it was originally printed, represented temperance. Now we have other divine virtues. We have strength, we have temperance, but what about prudence here? It's an interesting thing, and we'll get into that later. The minor arcana are the court and small cards, and the suits of the deck. This is where you can really start to see that. The court cards signify the four worlds, as we saw before, and these are going to kind of lay out what those four worlds do. So fire is going to be the first element that you've got. That's symbolized by wands, and that signifies energy or force. So for example, the Ace of Wands just signifies energy. That's all it signifies. And that's it's the rawest card, actually. Water is cups, or chalices, or however you wanted to define that. That signifies emotion. Air is swords. That signifies intellect. I like to think of it as the rapier wit that you hear described. That, remember that for sword and intellect. It is sometimes hard to remember which is wands and which is swords for me, because they kind of look the same sometimes. Earth is pentacles or coins. Waite Coleman calls them pentacles. Crowley calls them coins. This signifies the physical world. Everything has kind of been drawn down to physical manifestation. The king is going to be the archetypal world. The queen is the creative world. The prince is the formative. The knave and princess, that's knave in Waite Coleman, it's princess in Crowley. That's your manifestation. So if you understand these four things, you also get four elements and the four archetype, the four worlds of Kabbalah. You get 16 variations on that. These are also called the magical weapons, and in the Golden Dawn, you are supposed to build them yourself. You're not supposed to buy them. So this was very important to their system. You can also, these four tools are the tools of an ancient Egyptian scribe, which is why it's called the Book of Thoth. It was the quill the ink pot, the pen knife, and the writing desk. That was the scribe's tools. So only Thoth would think in terms of scribes, and Thoth is the god of wisdom. So that is why it was, considered to be the mythical book of Thoth, which doesn't exist. But that part of the major mythological narrative is that tarot was originally the secret book that Thoth, sent down to mankind to allow us to commune with him directly. Again, mythology, your mileage may vary. Now, the small cards, they're going to be the majority of your difficulty. The small cards are very difficult to fully understand, but if you were to lay out all of these cards in a circle, you would actually be making this zodiacal wheel of 12 signs, each one assigned, of course, to an element. Each sign has 3 decans, if you know astrology. So, for example, I'm a Cancer of the middle decan, so I'm a just straight Cancer. So there's interesting little variations in astrology that you just don't get in your newspaper horoscope. But each one of these cards signifies a decan of the zodiac, and that is some of the hardest information to really wrap around, because you got to really understand how astrology works. But it's not that hard, and I'll kind of give you some clues as to how that's going to work. So you got 360 degrees here. Each one is 1/56th of that circle. If you wanted to and make it like a prediction on when something would occur, you could theoretically use the small cards to pull when on the calendar that would happen. I don't recommend that. That doesn't make very much sense, but you could. Thoth is actually the best for the small cards, because Crowley quite wisely just wrote what decan it was on the top of the card. Really easy to learn it that way. And again, if that's too complicated, you can just fall back on Pamela Coleman. She really simplified it. She drew each one of these out by hand. And each card is, the small cards is kind of her interpretation of what that decan means. So don't worry about the small cards. They can be remembered and they can be mastered, but it's all remembering your 1 through 9 or 1 through 10, I should say. If you can remember those original 1 through 10s and apply them to whatever suit they're in, you're going to be able to suss it out. And there is a system to it, and I'll kind of lay that out in our next lesson. So there are some key systems to know, so take some time, maybe read up on these, spend some time in the meantime learning these details. So you're going to want to memorize the 4 suits and memorize what elements that they're connected to: wand fire, cup water, sword air, coin earth. There's the 22 Atu, 7 classical planets, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. There are 12 signs of the zodiac. Those can be remembered fairly easily. And you can fall back on your numerological significance that we went through earlier. Might be worth it for you to also just go through Wikipedia and look at each number, through numerology individually. Just take some notes. I recommend, when you're learning tarot, just get a loose leaf notebook and assign 1 page to each Atu and to each number. And as you learn things, just write it down on that. And that way you're going to have, a book of your own with your own thoughts on it that's going to expand as you're learning tarot, and you can refer back to it. That's just a handy trick that I had. Also, if you're wanting to memorize these things easily, there's nothing wrong with just buying a cheap weight Coleman deck and using a Sharpie marker and writing this information right on the top. That's something that I've done, and that really will work. And they're great. They're cards. You can already use them as flashcards. So ultimately, what is the goal of all that we're going to be doing here? The secret point of tarot is not that it has anything to do with any supernatural entities. It's a system that's been honed over centuries. It's designed to supercharge your powers of subjectivity. It's a way for you to think beyond yourself while also thinking about yourself. It's not demons, it's not angels, it's not God, it's not the devil. It's you yourself in your brain using images that are able to reflect on, and maybe using that information to reflect on something you already know. So it's going to unlock your thinking capabilities in a really easy way. It's going to use your it's going to give you a possible perspective that you would not have even thought about, and then you can compare that with what you already know, and you can use your own brain to come up with, oh well, what's a different insight here that I might have missed. um, it's using a universal system of images that can be understood by anybody on Earth, basically, unless you're, a distant, sub-Saharan tribe and you have no idea what a king is. I don't know, but you can. The tarot is to think better. That's what it is for. It's not actually drawing down secrets of the universe, but it is allowing yourself to just think about things in an organized, categorized way that thousands, millions of people in the past have also used to great effect. And you can also use it as a cool party trick. That's fun. People will pay you when you know this information. People will pay you, and if you've got the gift of gab and you're willing to bullshit a little, people find this entertaining. It's a lot of fun. So welcome to the Tarot Weirdo Club. Next lecture, we're going to go a deep dive on the 22 Atu. We're going to talk about the colors and the symbols and the Hebrew letters. We're going to really kind of unpack what Crowley's thelemic tweaks are and why maybe it might be for you to just ignore them. We're going to talk about the terminology of tarot, and we're going to get into the elements and the planets and the zodiac. And in the meantime, get your own deck. Figure out whether or not you want to go with Wade Coleman or Thoth. Just make a pick. Tarot is not a product. You just buying a tarot pack out of Amazon, that's not going to do anything for you. You need to actually learn the process of learning tarot, and that's going to expand your ability to be a successful tarot reader. And it's fun. It's not, I don't take it too seriously. That's very important. Never live and die by tarot. It will not work for you. But have fun with it and let it be a thing in the back of your head bubbling, and you'll find reasons why tarot is useful to you all the time. So anyway, that's the end of today's lecture. Tandy and I are going to be going to Japan for a couple weeks, so we probably won't be starting back up until mid-September, which should give you some time to maybe review what we've gone over, or maybe compile some notes of your own. Books I recommend are, Waite's Pictorial Key to the Tarot. Again, Waite's not the best, most readable writer on earth, but it's going to give you what he told Coleman to draw, and you might be able to pick out the differences of what she then subsequently drew. Crowley 777 and other Kabbalistic writings. That's going to be a really handy collection of Excel sheets, basically, or from the early 20th century, of all of the attributions Crowley knew. Every card he could find, and I think he even goes beyond the number 22, but it's just his own personal notes. So if you've ever wondered, hey, what incense does the Princess of Cups represent? He's got it in there, and it's a very incredibly useful book. And of course, there's 10 billion little books that are available on tarot. It's one of the most widely discussed topics that exist. So I open it up. Does anybody have any questions?
You can talk now.
Yes. Okay. Well, if you don't have any immediate questions, feel free to get me on Discord or email me, and I'm happy to review everything that we've got here. And for those of us who are coming back to watch this later, again, feel free to do the same. Reach out to me at any time. I am a tarot weirdo, and you are now too. So welcome aboard, and thanks for being here and listening to me.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was just like going over like my notes, like just trying to keep up with everything. But yeah,
I admit I could talk very fast, but if you need anything to go back over again, I'm happy
no,
to.
that's good. Probably just to go over a little bit more the four worlds of Kabbalah, that
Yeah, let
section.
me go back
Okay,
here.
let me just hop back in here.
Let me get back in here. Okay, yeah. So the um each Sephiroth on the Tree of Life has within it four worlds. And so four versions of that Sephiroth across the four worlds. So there's ultimately 40 uh, individual Sephiroth, but this is just an easy way to think about it. But Yod is going to be the highest, and also if you're curious what the G on your grandfather's Freemason ring signifies, it's Yod. There you go. I just broke that for you. Um, Ha, of course, also is a chimney or is a house with a window in it. So it signifies that there's air in a house. So it's kind of an out breath. So Yod Ha Vav Ha. The Vav signifies a nail. It's connecting, and it also kind of looks like a sword. That's easy to remember. But yeah, fire, water, air, earth. There's just remember it of commander in chief, generals, captains, soldiers, energy on Yod, uh, emotions on water on the first Ha, also water, intellect on swords or air, and physical manifestations on earth or pentacles. It moves down from fire to earth.
Okay.
It's you can really get lost in Kabbalah. I'm not kidding you. That you can spend
Yeah, no,
decades upon
there's
decades.
yeah, because it was what was that? I was briefly looking at 777 and just looking at the insane amount of
Mm-hmm.
associations that he fucking throws in.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can barely remember any of it. It's like, oh damn.
Well,
It's
in
very systematic.
Yeah, his theory, and I also put up my Excel sheet that I wrote. That might be a better way to remember all that. But
Yeah.
you will eventually, we'll get to it next week. But each Atu has a Hebrew letter attached to it. Um, if you really want to go to tarot, just memorize the Hebrew alphabet. That's a thing that helps a lot. Getting it in your brain folds and your brain meat for whatever reason unlocks a lot of the little minor significations about it. That's kind of the point I think the rabbis were trying to get you to do. Um, it's 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 very complicated. I personally prefer Pythagoras' system on a personal basis. I like it better. Um, but
Yeah, that seems to be a little bit more simplified. It
hmm
seems like because you have like what the four, yeah, as you said, like the four levels of enumeration,
yeah,
which it seems to be like much easier to kind of like both visualize and kind of like as far as like spreads go and understanding their
right.
potential associations. You know.
I think we know more about Kabbalah than we know about Pythagoreanism. That's kind of the problem. There's a lot of stuff about Pythagoreanism that died with Pythagoras, so there's just a lot of mysteries. Um,
Hmm.
but also, never get too far into Doth. Like people go way too far into a non-existent Sephiroth, and it's just not great. So never consider 11 to be a true Sephiroth. Um, but once you start really getting into it, it becomes second nature. But it is it is hard to kind of break that Hebrew shell as it were. So I like to use the military metaphor in my head because it makes sense to me. Lon Milo Duquette, who's a thalamic writer, uses the metaphor of a four-storied factory where the CEO lives on top and the architects live on the 3rd floor and the factory is on the 2nd floor and the showroom is on the 1st. That's his way of thinking about that. If you really want to get into the thought system, Lon Milo Duquette is really fantastic for that. I don't agree with everything he says. In fact, I don't agree with much that he says on a philosophical basis. But as far as tarot, he knows what he's talking about. And he's really good at laying out the small cards in that circle in a very dramatic fashion. That's very impressive when you see him do it. I think there's a video of him doing it on YouTube, and he's very theatrical and does a lot of flourishes. I think he jumps to a lot of conclusions that you don't need to, but
Right.
I'm never going to besmirch any other tarot writers too hardly, unless they're and they've invented a tarot that doesn't make any sense, and you'll see that. Like, for example, somebody I don't really want to describe the tarot too much that I was given, but it was a tarot deck of a particular ideological bent and of a modern perspective that would just not have been there centuries ago, and I just thought it was rubbish. But modern tarot artists, and I am too. I've drawn my own tarot deck, and everybody who does it brings their own thing into it. But you just gotta be careful. That it's still this is why I like these two decks, because they're objective and well, not objective, but they have a system to them that other decks sometimes just don't. Alrighty, any other questions?
No, I was just more thinking, like, I see a lot of oracle cards floating out there.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I feel like is kind of fun. I never got the appeal of them, to be honest with you.
I find them lazy, and I also find them as like an end run around like worries of Satanism, but you're still doing the same thing. Just because you call it an angel doesn't mean it's not just doing the same thing. Oh, sorry. I think I unplugged myself. Alrighty, so I will let you all know when the next one is, and we'll move on from there. But take some time to just kind of. Hello,
Sure.
did I mute myself? Okay.
Probably.
Alrighty, well, I'll see you later. Alrighty, Tandy, you can go on ahead and stop the recording.
Yeah, ready?
Woo, that went well. I'm proud of myself.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the next class.
Great. Yeah, I'm going to make sure that this is available for people. I'm going to see if I can get it up on YouTube because people want to see this. And we're subgeniuses. We don't take it that seriously. That's important. Don't make important life decisions based on the tarot. That's absurd.
For sure.
Alrighty, thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
All right. Take care, y'all.